The first torch fell before anyone realized the gates had been breached. You hear it, the crack of wood splintering, then the rush of boots on marble, then voices sharp with laughter that doesn't belong in a place of silence. Shadows bolt across the courtyard. White fabric flashes under moonlight, then vanishes into doorways that won't hold. Someone whispers a prayer in Greek, but the words dissolve into the sound of armor scraping stone, and orders barked in Latin, cold and efficient as the machinery of empire itself. Before we go any deeper, I'd love to know where in the world are you watching this from? It amazes me that a night from 83 BC can still pull us in from every corner of the planet, across languages and centuries. What you're about to hear is not a battle. It's what came after, the kind of violence empires don't commemorate with statues or coins, but bury in the margins of official histories. 10,000 women, many of them royal attendants, temple guardians, daughters of noble families aligned with the kingdom of Pontus, became targets of a calculated Roman reprisal. Ancient sources preserve fragments of what happened: systematic sexual violence, mass enslavement, entire households erased in a single night. This was not chaos. It was policy, engineered by one of Rome's most disciplined and unforgiving commanders, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. The question isn't whether it happened. The question is why Rome, a republic that prided itself on law and order, allowed this to become doctrine. To understand that, you have to go back 5 years earlier, to a night in 88 BC that Rome never forgave. It began with secret letters. Across the cities of Asia Minor, Ephesus, Pergamon, Traios, Adramyttium, messages arrived from Mithridates VI, king of Pontus, carrying a single coordinated instruction: kill every Roman and Italian resident on a specific day. No exceptions, no mercy. What followed became known as the Asiatic Vespers. In a single orchestrated massacre, an estimated 80,000 Roman settlers were dragged from their homes and butchered. Merchants were murdered in the Forum. Families were hunted down inside temples where they had fled for sanctuary. Children were torn from their mothers' arms and killed in front of crowds. Blood ran through streets where Roman trade caravans had once brought wealth and wine and the promise of imperial protection. For Rome, this was more than a military defeat. It was humiliation on a scale that demanded an answer written in fire. Sulla was the man chosen to deliver it. Born in 138 BC to a patrician family fallen into obscurity, he grew up on the edges of Rome's elite, surrounded by actors, gamblers, and courtesans. He learned early that power was fragile, that reputation mattered more than lineage, and that the only thing that separated a hero from a corpse was timing. His rise began under Gaius Marius during the war against Jugurtha, where Sulla outmaneuvered rivals and captured the Numidian king through diplomacy and nerve. That success planted ambition like a seed. By the time the social war erupted in Italy, Sulla had become a general who inspired fierce loyalty in his troops and a reputation for cruelty that preceded him into battle. But the Asiatic Vespers changed him. Reports flooded Roman entire families butchered, wealth seized, survivors telling stories that ignited public fury. Sulla, now consul, reportedly told his officers, "They struck first, we will strike last." He reshaped his army into something more than a fighting force. Higher pay, brutal discipline, networks of informers. Desertion meant death. Loyalty meant reward. Trauma became fuel. Some of it may have been personal, a distant cousin killed in Pergamon, though whether that mattered to Sulla is unclear. What mattered was the narrative. Vengeance was no longer abstract, it was policy. In 87 BC, Sulla landed in Greece with roughly 30,000 men. Waiting for him were Pontic proxy forces, more than 100,000 strong, commanded by Archelaus, a skilled admiral turned general. Cities wavered, some defected back to Rome. Athens did not. Its ruler, the tyrant Ariston, mocked Sulla from the walls. Secure in the belief that the city's ancient fortifications would hold, the siege began that winter, and it was methodical. Sulla diverted rivers, cut down sacred groves to build siege engines, dug trenches that encircled the city like a noose. His men grumbled about the cold and the work until he promised them plunder. Inside Athens, life grew desperate. Markets emptied. Citizens chewed leather and grass. Ariston feasted publicly while the population starved. Among those trapped inside was a young woman named Eudoxia. She was 20, a handmaiden in the Pontic royal entourage sent to Athens to strengthen Ariston's court. Her life before the war had been sheltered poetry lessons in Sinope's palaces, tending sacred flames for the goddess, dreaming of a noble marriage arranged by protocol and tradition. Not this, not hunger that gnawed through the nights, or the sound of Roman rams battering the gates like thunder that never stopped. She and the other attendants huddled in a modest house near the agora, sharing thin bread and whispered stories to drown out the noise. "The Romans will tire," someone murmured. Eudoxia nodded, but doubt gnawed at her. Rumors spread quickly through the city. Women like her, symbols of Pontic alliance and royal favor, would be the first taken when the walls fell. She hid a small dagger in the folds of her garment, unsure whether it was meant for defense or something else. The breach came at midnight in early 86 BC. Ladders slammed against stone. Shouts erupted. Torches flared like predatory eyes. Roman soldiers poured through the city like water through a broken dam. Eudoxia and the others fled to a temple, barricading the doors as screams echoed outside. Families were cut down in the streets. Homes were stripped bare. A centurion smashed through the temple doors with an axe. Hands seized arms. Eudoxia fought, but numbers crushed resistance. The night dissolved into terror that had no shape, only sensation, rough hands, cold air, voices shouting commands she couldn't understand. At dawn, Athens lay broken. Streets were slick with blood. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Sulla ordered the killing stopped, but only after thousands were already dead. Eudoxia and the surviving women were chained and marched out into the daylight, blinking against the sun like they'd been pulled from a grave. This was never about her alone. It was about sending a message, breaking alliances, teaching cities across Greece and Asia Minor the price of betraying Rome. And the machine was only getting started. The sack of Athens was not the end. It was a demonstration. What followed spread outward like a shockwave, rolling through Greece and into the countryside where Mithridates' armies still maneuvered. Sulla didn't linger. Once the message had been delivered, he pivoted north. His scouts brought word that Archelaus was regrouping in Boeotia, drawing together the last great Pontic force on Greek soil. Against them stood Sulla's legions, outnumbered nearly 3-1. What Sulla lacked in numbers, he replaced with system. Forced marches broke his men down and rebuilt them harder. Every camp was a fortress. Every ditch a potential grave. From a legionary's perspective, the campaign was relentless. Officers screamed orders as arrows fell like rain, and there was no room for hesitation. Discipline was survival. The two forces collided near Carena. Archelaus launched his phalanxes forward, bronze and iron crashing together like waves against rock. Sulla anchored his line on high ground, hiding reserves behind the hills. When the Pontic center surged, Roman cohorts struck from the flanks. The rout was catastrophic. Entire units vanished into ravines. Survivors spoke of marshes clogged with corpses, of armor glinting beneath black water. The smell lingered for days. But victory alone wasn't enough. The machine demanded escalation. Sulla rewarded informers and executed deserters without ceremony. Booty was distributed with mathematical precision, shares for kills, promotions for bravery. Supply lines stayed tight. Hunger stayed focused outward. In towns suspected of sympathy for Pontus, resistance collapsed quickly. A merchant from Thespia would later recall watching Roman soldiers empty granaries down to the last sack. "They took everything," he said, "even the sacred oil." There were moments of eerie calm, a soldier washing blood from his hands in a stream, staring at his reflection as birds sang overhead. Beauty and horror coexisted without apology. Then the orders came. Burn Panopius, sack Lebeda. Villages were emptied, people driven out like livestock. A priest from the hills approached the Romans, begging mercy for his flock. He was turned away. Reports moved up the chain tallies of seized gold sent directly to Sulla. Melted temple offerings funded the next campaign. Archelaus made his final stand at Orchomenus. The terrain was treacherous swamps and narrow plains, but Sulla forced the engagement. He dug in, daring the Pontic army to attack. When they did, the ground turned against them. Chariots thundered forward, scythes flashing. Roman lines buckled, then locked. Spears thrust, shields slammed, shouts collapsed into a single animal roar. When Archelaus's line broke, there was nowhere to run. Thousands fled into the marshes, many drowned under the weight of their armor. Others were cut down as they begged for mercy. With that, Greece was lost to Mithridates. But Sulla's vengeance did not end on the battlefield. In the winter of 84 BC, as blood-soaked snow melted into mud, peace talks were held at Dardanus. Mithridates yielded territory. He paid massive indemnities. He surrendered ships and hostages. Sulla accepted not out of forgiveness, but necessity. Rome was tearing itself apart in civil war, and Sulla needed to return west. Yet even as treaties were signed, punishment continued. In cities that had supported Pontus, crushing fines were imposed. Roman soldiers were quartered in private homes, where abuse became routine. It was not chaos, it was policy terror as deterrence. Whole districts were hollowed out. Ancient sources suggest that up to 10,000 women noble daughters, temple attendants, those labeled royal virgins because of their protected status, were violated or sold into slavery during this phase. Some historians argue the number was closer to 6,000, concentrated in key palaces and sanctuaries. The exact figure matters less than the pattern. Homes invaded, families torn apart, alliances punished through bodies. And here, the first cracks appeared. What was meant to secure Rome's dominance instead planted seeds of resentment that would erupt again. Mithridates did not forget. He rebuilt, he waited. Sulla's system designed to end resistance quietly guaranteed future wars. By spring of 83 BC, Sulla sailed west. His army, hardened and ruthless and loyal only to him, landed in Italy and marched straight into civil war. Rome itself became a battlefield. At the Colline Gate, Sulla crushed the forces of Marius's heirs. Thousands of prisoners were slaughtered inside Rome's circus. Flaminius, while their screams echoed through the Senate chambers. By the end of the year, Sulla was dictator. He posted lists of enemies' prescriptions and offered rewards for their deaths. Senators, knights, old rivals. Thousands were executed, their property seized. Terror once again became administrative. And then, just as abruptly, Sulla stepped away. In 79 BC, he retired. Soon after, he died not in battle, but from disease. His body was paraded through Rome in triumph. His supporters scattered. His enemies stayed silent. But the damage endured. Pontic remnants regrouped under Mithridates, who launched 2 more wars against Rome. Asia Minor's economy staggered for decades. Entire communities vanished. Populations shifted, never fully recovering. There was one final irony. The documents Sulla seized to condemn Mithridates' cords meant to justify conquest preserved Pontic history instead. Vengeance became an unintended archive. Centuries later, the ground itself began to speak. In the 19th century, excavations in Athens' Kerameikos uncovered mass graves. Bones bore sword marks consistent with ancient accounts of the sack. In 1972, archaeologist John Camp unearthed charred timbers remnants of fires set by Sulla's men along with pottery etched with desperate graffiti. At Orchomenus, 20th century surveys pulled arrowheads and fragments of armor from the marshes, exactly where Plutarch said men drowned. In Pontus, modern Turkish digs at Amasya uncovered royal seals and women's jewelry from the period's silent traces of lives erased. These artifacts confirmed the machine's reach. Temple gold melted into Roman coinage. Personal grief transformed into imperial infrastructure. Today, those objects sit behind museum glass, labeled and cataloged, stripped of the screams that once accompanied them. Why does this matter now? Because it shows how easily power converts grief into cycles of punishment. How occupation turns civilians into targets. How the logic Sulla perfected vengeance as policy, terror as stability still whispers in modern conflicts. Systems built on revenge consume even their creators, and they leave echoes in bone, in stone, in memory. Return to that first night, the cedar smoke thinning, the screams fading, the torches guttering out one by one. What changed? An empire defended its pride, but at an immeasurable cost. Those women meant to vanish into history's margins did not disappear. They endure in chronicles, in archaeology, in the questions we still ask. Eudoxia's name may be invented, but her story is not. Somewhere in the rubble of Athens or the archives of Rome, fragments of her existence remain a chain link, a pottery shard, a line in Plutarch that records what happened but not who it happened to. Sulla believed he was restoring order. What he actually built was a template proof that calculated cruelty could be framed as necessity, that violence could be industrialized, that the line between justice and atrocity was thinner than anyone wanted to admit. His shadow stretched long. Julius Caesar watched and learned. So did Pompey. So did every ambitious general who came after, each one convinced that this time force would solve what diplomacy could not. The violence did not end when the treaties were signed. It echoed forward, shaping the republic's collapse. The rise of the emperors, the logic of imperial reprisal that would define Rome for centuries. And it left a question that still haunts us. When does security become indistinguishable from terror? When does order require forgetting the faces of those it destroys? The past is not silent. It's preserved in the things empires tried to erase: jewelry buried in haste, bones marked by blades, names carved into stone by people who refuse to be forgotten. And it survives in the stories we choose to tell, the questions we refuse to let die. The machine Sulla built believed it could write history in its own image. But memory is stronger than marble, and some echoes, once released, never truly fade.